Welcome to another Java tutorial. We'll be continuing our look at the figures. We're looking at figure 4.9 and 4.10. We're going to be continuing with our gradebook and gradebook test example. As you recall from our last tutorial, we were entering 10 grades and computing the average. Now, it's not a very useful method to have when we're forcing the class to have 10 students or 10 grades. It's better to make it so that it's flexible, that we have a variable number of grades to enter. And the way we do that is by using what's called a sentinel. A sentinel is a special number that will stop the loop. So instead of checking grade counter as the loop, we're going to use the sentinel. And it's important to pick a sentinel that is not one of the values that you normally input. So, for this example, we're using -1 as the sentinel because you can't have -1 as a grade. Well, not normally. You'd have to have a mean teacher to do that. Okay, so -1 is our sentinel. So we get a grade. We check to see if it's not -1. If it's not -1, then we will add that to the total and increment our grade counter. And we'll prompt the user again and get the input. And we repeat until we get a -1. Now, it's important to prompt the user of what the sentinel is. You can't have the user guess at what your sentinel is because it's a value that's not normally used. And because it's possible to have a grade of 0, you shouldn't use 0 as a sentinel in this program. So, just a reminder, you should have a good sentinel and you should tell the user what the sentinel is. We have changed the average to be a double. This is a floating point value, which means we can have decimals in our answer. So, this time we don't have to add 5 to our total to get it to round properly because we don't need rounding. We're going to print out a decimal value. And it's important to cast total into a double before we do the division. If you don't cast total to a double, what will happen is this will perform an integer divide, which will give you a quotient. Again, this means that when it gets cast to a double, you will not have any decimal values. And let's look at the rest of the code. Since we have a variable number of grades being entered, we should print out how many grades were entered, and we should print the total out as well. To output the average, we need to do a %f. %f means we're outputting a floating point value. We have a %.2f. This is a special formatter for floating point. And what this .2 means is that it will print the floating point out to 2 decimal places. Okay? If you don't specify this, it will just spit out however many decimal places the default value is. And before we print all this out, we need to check grade counter. If grade counter is 0, we're not going to print out anything other than this prompt that there's no grades entered. If it's greater than 0, then we go ahead and do the calculations. So the minor change here was grade counter starts at 0 rather than starting at 1 this time. And gradebook test has essentially not changed other than using the new class. So let's run it. Okay, let's just test the worst case and we'll start off with a -1. No grades were entered, and that executed properly. So let's run it again. We'll do 9, 10, and 12. This time we'll just quit with 3 values because it's easier to compute. So we have 3 grades. Total's 31, and when we divide it out, we get 10.33, which is correct. Now, let's test to see how this formatted print rounds values off. So if we get 32, this will be 10.666 repeat. So let's see how this rounds off. 10, 10, and 12. And -1 to quit. Okay, 32. And this prints out 10.67, which means it rounded the values off to the nearest. Okay, so it rounded off to the nearest hundreds. And I like to be specific with my prompts. When we enter a grade or -1, -1 doesn't actually mean quit. It means you have finished entering the grades. Generally, quit means to quit without doing any further action. Quit in this top case is correct, but quit in this bottom case is not correct. So let's just save that and run it one more time. So 10, 10, 11, and -1. And the prompts look correct. And that finishes our lesson.